and welcome to another episode of You Haven't Seen What? A married couple's quest to rectify their wrongs if their partner has never seen culturally relevant movies. I'm Joelle.
I'm Parry.
Oh, you didn't pop your pee.
No.
Pop. No?
No, I mean, we did it in the outtake, but I was trying to avoid it this time. So
all right.
I didn't think that was part of the intro.
You did it there.
Part.
Exactly. And guess what, folks? He has still yet to go on that bike ride since the last episode recorded.
You don't know that. That's in the future. This is in the past.
This is not in the future. No, don't start that crap today. Thank you. But we do have a very special episode for you.
Yes, this is a connection to our Koyaanisqatsi episode that we released recently.
Yep, it is an interview with Godfrey Reggio,
the director of Koyaanisqatsi.
Yes, I think we've said that in the episode prior as well.
We did, yes.
Right.
And Reggio will always give a lot of credit to his collaborators, but certainly he is the visionary behind it. And whether it be Philip Glass, the music, or...
I would say a different word than visionary.
Mm-hmm.
He's the conceptualizer and facilitator.
I like that. I think you're right.
And I think he would almost agree.
I think so, because he always talks about him being the collaborator, or the one who brings everyone together.
Correct.
Into the collaboration, but he always gives everyone their due.
Correct.
And speaking of collaborators, I believe the interview was recorded from where he was. Typically he lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but he's currently, or at least when we recorded this, in Brooklyn, working on his current project over at Optic Nerve Studios, and that is with John Kane, who he worked on Naqoyqatsi with. And also working on this one is, of course, Philip Glass again, and the theater director, Robert Wilson. But interesting thing about John Kane, apparently he saw Koyaanisqatsi and DJ Red Alert DJing live all in the same week, and he just changed his major, and it pretty much changed the course of his life. And he actually worked on a number of different things, including he was the DJ for Fisher Spooner and worked on the early MTV Moon Man promos. So he's had a really interesting career as well, and he is still a current collaborator with Godfrey Reggio. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. But we do have to give big thanks to Liam, Mr. Reggio's assistant, who really helped us out, really great, nice guy to talk to, and was really helpful in putting all of this together. But to get into the introduction to this, because I think I was so nervous when we were recording this interview, and we also were having the reverb.
Yes, you were fanboying.
I was. And we were having that reverb issue. So if we talk really slow in the interview and fumble a little bit, some of that is nerves, but some of it is because hearing your own voice reverbing back at you as you're trying to formulate a full question is a little disconcerting. And so it might sound a little awkward on occasion because of the reverb, which you won't hear as the audience, but we certainly could as we were recording it.
Yeah, so just be gentle with the old man.
You mean me?
Yes, you. In our relationship, you're the old man.
Yes, I am. So Godfrey Reggio certainly introduces himself in this, but I did want to say that this is a film that had a profound impact upon me, as we've talked about in our previous episode and in this. And it's not often you get to speak with someone who put something together that has had that impact on your life. And, I was really hitting me at the right moment. And after I was introduced to this, nothing was really ever the same for me. But I was living in an era, this is in the early 90s when I first saw it, where, fast forward and slow motion and that type of imagery had become pretty ubiquitous by that point. And what I came to realize was that Koyaanisqatsi in many ways was sort of like discovering the mythical origin, because so many things have been inspired by the look of it. And it was like discovering this, hidden truth that hit me at exactly the right moment and helped to give meaning to a world I was just kind of starting to see. And so every time I see it, I get a similar feeling, but still experience it differently, as we've talked about.
Do we need to wrap it up?
So, all right, we'll jump into it, and we hope you all enjoy the interview. And a huge thank you to everyone involved, and of course, a huge thank you to Godfrey Reggio for being so gracious to be a part of this interview with us. All right. Well, good morning. It's such a pleasure to be speaking with someone who has been a great influence to me. And so it's really an honor to get to speak with you today. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
I'm going to say something really quick. My husband is going to nerd out through this entire interview. It is such a big deal, not only to speak with you, not only for him to speak with you, but for us to speak with you. Because I really believe that you have influenced so much of his thinking.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to be speaking to myself as well, so I'll be listening very carefully.
Excellent. Well, I think some who will be listening to this they may know some work. They may know the Qatsi Trilogy, maybe Anima Mundi, but some are going to be uninitiated. And so I was hoping that you would kind of give us a self-introduction as to who you are and about your work.
Well, let me first off say that the work is not really my work alone in any way. I always work with people more talented than I in terms of their capacity, and people who are capable of being in a condition where criticism is part of the form. In other words, people who have vanity of ego can't be in it, but people who have ego should be in it. And so it's the group of us that create this event. It's a collaborative form of art, the most demanding, the most interesting, and the most difficult. So these are outsider projects. It's like rather than going to General Motors and getting a car, we build our own car. We don't go to the store to get the milk. We have our own cow. Those are metaphors, of course, that these are projects from the outside, not from the inside. And they're projects also from the outside that are hard to categorize. So is it a documentary? Is it a piece of poetry? Is it a big coffee table book that's nonsense? Were the people who made it completely out of their minds and stoned? Might there be something in between? So it's hard to figure out what category these fall into, not for me and those that make these, but for the public and for the companies that have to distribute all of this stuff. So, all by way of saying, these films that I'm involved in have taken out the tradition of story, plot, characterization, and replaced it with the genius loci of the world we live in. So, for example, the visuals that we shoot are we shoot a building as if it were, Madonna or Lady Gaga. We shoot it with that intensity because the building itself, if we find the frame and it talks to us and we talk to it, if that doesn't sound too crazy, when you find just the right place to do it, the right sun, then you can shoot that building as an entity because indeed it has a voice. It's not that I say it has a voice, but it's been known from old, from the Greeks, the genius loci. Every location has its own voice, as well as its memory, as well as its past, present, and future. So to find that is what these films are about. So they don't tell you a story. These films are done in the first lingua franca of our language, which is body language, facial expression, eye behavior, screaming, crying, laughter, pointing, gesture. This is the language we all spoke originally and still speak today, some with more articulation than others. Like I'm part Italian, my family speaks with their hands all the time. They could, as if they didn't have a mouth. The hands say it all. So it's that language we speak in, and the language we give up the how would I say it, the clarity of the spoken word in order to give you the impression of the heard sound. The music that Philip Glass does is like the narrative for these. It's an emotional armchair. It's not telling you how to feel or what to think or illustrating the image. It's an accompaniment that it's like the Holy Ghost inside of the film that has its own narrative. And of course, like all music, it's not like words I speak right now that go through metaphor that we have to understand the terms for in order to see whether it's coherent or not. Music goes directly to the listener's soul. And so, in that sense, many organizations, religions in particular, are very worried about where the music comes from. They want to control the music, so they want to control the dance. So some musics, usually most new musics as they come out, are condemned because they're a threat. They go right to the soul. And because each soul is completely different, yet all the same, we come from the same Mother Earth, Anima Mundi, the breath of life itself. Since that is the case, we all, the person sitting next to you, Joel and Parry, you all can see the same thing and have a completely different experience. Some get up and leave because there's no meat on the hamburger, only lettuce, tomato, and pickle. Others don't know what to make of it. Others are sunken in their seat, not knowing where they are. Some of these films speak to the subconscious of people. I mean, it's autodidactic. We don't tell. These films are not to give you answers to anything. They're to create questions for the viewer that only the viewer may answer. So they've been done in a number of iterations. The Qatsi Trilogy, Koyaanisqatsi, Powaqatsi, Naqoyqatsi. That was done over a very long time, from the 1970s into the year 2003. So that's a journey of a lifetime. Like all artists, you live many lives and die many deaths. But for this, you have to stay on the trail. You have to be there and be devoted to what you feel the calling is. So to do this kind of work, one has to be committed, not with grace and gratuity, but like to an insane asylum to pull this off. This is what making a film is about. It's about being this kind of film, being possessed by the occasion and giving yourself up to do this. So I've talked a lot now. Maybe you have a question, and then I could continue talking or say bye-bye, whatever you.
Well, there are so many questions that could come out of just that section, and I do touch on some of those later. But I did want to comment on one thing you said when you mentioned the collaboration and your role in it and the role of so many others. And it's something I've always appreciated in reading interviews and listening to other interviews that you've given, is that you do mention all of these people like Ron Fricke or Alton Walpole, or the different people that you've worked with over the years and how they've been a part of this process. And how do you see your role in kind of bringing all that together?
Well, I guess I'll be the last to know, truthfully. I left home. I decided to leave home at 13, left home after the 8th grade. I went from La Dolce Vita, New Orleans, into the Middle Ages, basically, became a young monk. I was a monk for 14 years, had final vows at the age of 25, at 65, in 1965. And at that point was asked to leave my order for all kinds of zealot reasons. I was a zealot, a young zealot. So I had taken a vow for life to live in poverty, chastity, obedience. I felt that I would be a terrible father for any child because I was intoxicated or married to the work that I was doing. It was not like, being a workaholic. Work was life. To be here was to create, and I had this opportunity beyond my grace. It was written in me, like the grace from the gods, as it were, the grace of enthusiasm, to be interested in one thing, ekagrata from the Sanskrit, one pointedness. So my role, I realized early on, I if I get around machines or gizmos, one, I'm an addicted kind of person, so I have to stay completely away from the gizmo, or I might be lost inside the wires forever, as 9 out of 8 people are who use it. We become addicted to the things we do. We can't live without it.
Right.
And two, I know that I have no facility in technical things. I drive a car. I guess the only thing I know how to do is put the gas in or steer the wheel. I don't have that facility. So it's good to realize the limitations you have. What I have is a big mouth. And I want to say this, that my mouth does not operate from my ideas. My ideas operate from my mouth because I believe in speaking. In speaking, we create the ideas that we have in our minds. Speaking is the mother of thought, not its handmaiden, as someone said. So my job is I speak in a way my own language. The crew that works with me, I've been on a project now for a while, 60 days. We're all speaking a different language, the language I came into mentally ill, and they're all speaking it with the same definitions. We're talking about the same thing. We have a big group of people, all with one heartbeat, one breath, but all different at the same time. So the many, the one. So my job, I'm like a blind person who can't see, or a deaf person who doesn't hear, or a dumb person without ideas. And what I'm doing is working through the facility, the grace, the opportunity of bringing not the best people, but the absolute best people, meaning anyone who's willing to take the journey we can all climb mountains, walk on water. There's no such thing as the best person. We are the best we can be if we decide to be. So we've created the best world that we possibly can have. And in film, or at least the kind that I'm involved in, it's way beyond the capacity of one person. It usually requires, for this kind of consistency over years, to have a group that you fundament with.
So essentially, you almost socially construct your own language on a film, it sounds like.
Yes.
You bring in your own ideas, opinions, but yet find a common ground so that you're able to go ahead and create this film.
Well, I take myself as the subject of most films because I know myself. Like all of us try to know ourselves, and I feel that while I'm different from other people, I'm the same at the same time. So if I'm talking about living under a technological orb, which is worse than Al Qaeda, being subject to I live in that world. While I don't use the gizmo or the computer that Liam set up for me, my food, my transportation, the light, the vibe that I live under, I can't escape. There's nowhere to escape, as someone said, in a unified world, Guy Debord. There's no exile in a unified world. So what we're seeing is the Los Angelesization of the planet. We're seeing everything. We're seeing the homogenation of the beauty of diversity into one monstrous, uniformed, globalized monstrosity, and where everything is attuned to anything that goes on. If there's a fart in Beijing, we hear it in Russia, it vibrates here. It's that kind of world we live in. So I'm part of that world. I take my experience don't exempt myself from the things I'm looking at, criticizing. And I use the very thing to, when in Rome, speak like the Romans, okay? The language we speak today is not what I'm talking. However, we see the world through our language. Wittgenstein says the limits of my language are the limits of my world. So the language I'm trying to show is this language of image that all are accessible to. And it's a story not to be told through the word, but one to behold with your own senses. So it's not a syllogism, it's not rational, it's not non-rational, it's non-mental is what it is, so that it creates for you an experience of the subject rather than a syllogism of a documentary for pro and con. So the advice would be like you're out with Joel and you and Perry are riding in the forest wherever you are. Where are you, by the way?
Miami area.
Miami. So you're in Miami. You're out there by the water. You're not saying, gee whiz, I wonder what that wave means today. I mean, you're just taking it in. That's what these films are. You just take it in. Let it speak to you. You're walking in the woods. You let the tree speak to you. Hopefully you don't have your gizmo or someone who can't stop talking. So you can hear that which is around you. And these films offer that for those that wish to hear.
And speaking of language, I've heard you in interviews talk about how the language that exists really can't describe the shifts and changes that have happened in the world. And when you were looking for names for the first Koyaanisqatsi, that you turned to language that most people didn't know, Hopi, because it lacked a context for most people and therefore didn't carry any baggage. People wouldn't
Right.
make assumptions about it.
Right.
And so I'm curious to hear a little more detail. I know some, but I'd like to hear more about the story of speaking with the Hopi elders and how you were able to describe what you were doing and how you asked for that permission or got the permission to use the words.
Okay, very good question. Thank you. I didn't at first wish to have any title for the film, only a visual. I was persuaded by everybody plus 10 other people that that was a stupid mistake. In retrospect, whatever, it doesn't matter. I didn't do that. Um, and so I wanted to find a word that had no cultural baggage. And the way to do that is to find words from cultures of orality. Like we're losing hundreds of languages every day because language is tied to place, to land. Land and life go together. You lose the land, you lose your language. So I happen to live in the Southwest. It's for me. It's like I would my superlatives would stumble over each other to try to describe how much it means to me there. So it's like a spiritual place for me. I can feel it inside. It's personal, but not just for me, for those that come as well. And the Hopis live up there. They've been at least as far as all the locals know, the oldest guys around. And I had some friends that knew something about the Hopis, and the more I learned about them, they seem interested. So I asked a friend to set me up with a little meeting with a holy man or a Kikmungwe in the village of Haute-Villa. They're an anarchistic, all the Hopi villages are anarchistic. Their unity is in their ritual, but it's each village practices it differently, and there's the unity of diversity rather than nation state. Now they're part of, they have the Hopi Tribal Council for the government and all that. These people don't buy that. I talk to the Hopis I talk to. So I talked to a man called David Manange, who was the head of a very humble clan, but he happened to be the medicine man for the whole village. He was a very unusual guy. I think he died at around 103 years old years ago now. I met him in his 70s, and he was the most playful guy. And to make a long story short, I became his friend, came to Santa Fe, stayed with my family and I, entertained the kids, didn't like to be very intellectual, but always playful with children. But when he did talk, he said, what you guys call sane, we call insane. What you call normal, we call abnormal. And that was music to my ears, because I felt at that point, like I was really going out of my tree, hanging by my tail, Tales, from the tree. And here I had a holy man who I admired, who, not for him being, quote, a holy man, but for the path that he chose. He was the speaker of Hopi prophecies to Bahana, or white people all over the world. He had his own passport, Hopi, that he made himself. He made the world take it, and he traveled all over the place. Anyway, what I'm getting to is that their word is more perspicacious to me than our language, because our language has lost its charge. It's become assumptive. We use a word and we don't see the depth of where it comes from. It becomes kind of a cliche, if I can be so bold, a patina that we put over things. And if you read the newspapers, or you're well informed by one of the terrible news medias, the pro and cons we have, those are the people on both sides, right, left, middle, center, who know the least, because they're listening to the people that only cover the veneer. So it's to those, forget about being a news junkie. You're not going to find the real event there. It's beneath the pages that they won't show anyone. Now, I'm not talking about QAnon. I'm talking about something that makes QAnon look like kindergarten. Okay. I'm talking about something that is accessible to all of us, but our language is not seeing it anymore, and we see through the language. So to see the world I live in now, the world that I said I was certainly part of, can't be exempt from, I see it through the lens of the Hopi, through that word, because that word has more clarity in it, more insight, more humility, more wisdom than any word in our language to describe the world we live in. Koyaanisqatsi, crazy life, life in turmoil, life out of balance, a way of life that calls for another way of living. What word do we have that comes close to that? People like Salman Rushdie has taken these words as description in his literature. Koyaanisqatsi, Powaqatsi, because they have a fullness that is not held within now the assumptive limits of our language. So as the famous old Chinese wise man said, in a time of maximum social crisis, the single most important thing we may do is to rename the world in which we live. The world we live in is Koyaanisqatsi. Koyaanisqatsi. So that's my little riff on language and why I chose these words when it came out. In Italian, it's kind of humorous. I like that. Qatsi and Koyaanisqatsi means cock and balls in Italian. Many people thought this was a Japanese film because it sounded like Kawasaki or Sayuki or whatever. It's ridiculous. I love that because these are not familiar words. These are words that come from a handful of people living deliberately in enormous difficulty just to stay focused on the land, the earth, the genius loci.
Well, I think when you talk about the language of place, almost, when speaking of New Mexico, I also lived in New Mexico a number of years, lived in Albuquerque, and felt that same deep connection to it. And I also grew up in the South. I grew up in Savannah, part of my childhood. And I'm wondering if that combination of the South, which is so marinated in history, and same with the Southwest, and that history is often so close to the surface as it isn't in some other places, if that exposure to those two places sort of combined and have been a part of your worldview and your influence in how you see things and create things.
Well, I'm from New Orleans, and
Yes.
you don't know that, but I'm saying I'm from New Orleans. My family's been there since the middle of the 1700s, a little before. So they're one of the first Italian families there. They have a terrible history there, I might add. And I want to say that, you can't go back to where you've never left before. So while I'm all over the place, New Orleans never left me. So I'm home in New Orleans, and it's home in me. My father was born right near the Atchafalaya Swamp, the biggest river swamp in North America, a nursery to the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. And it's a place that I'm tattooed, watermarked. I'm also grew up as a Catholic. I went to Mater Della Rosa School for 9 years, flunked the kindergarten, if you can believe it, okay, for wasting time, annoying others, put me right in modality. And that if I forget Mater Della Rosa, she remembers me. I'm watermarked with her, all of my tendencies. I'm an agnostic Catholic. The Catholic is watermarked. My mind is agnostic. I believe they go beautifully together because at the end of the day, we know nothing about anything, and any good theologian would tell you that. So I feel right at home in the vivid unknown, knowing very little. What we know is so small compared to what is apparently all around us, not just out there. All out there is inside of in here. So,
Yes. And I don't want to keep you from asking a question. I know I have a million, so.
You're good. Keep
Okay.
going.
Speaking of religion and working with youth, I am very curious to hear a little bit more about your time with the Christian Brothers and how you got to New Mexico and how you started working with the youth out there, the gang education programs that you were working on.
well, how do I say this? My intent, when you're a kid, that's the time in life when you're most capable of generosity. Because one, you think you'll live forever, death is not on the radar. And two, you're full of generosity if it's tapped. If you tell a kid they're a shit, they'll be a shit. If you tell a kid that they're great, 9 out of 8 will arise to the occasion. I picked that up pretty early. And I knew that as a brother, my task was to live outside the world. That was exciting to me, be in the world, but not of it. And so that brought me to, I spent 4 years in what you would call the high school. They called it I was a young junior novice for 4 years, and then a postulant for a number of months, and then a novice for a year, where you learn all of the particulars of being a monk in a more refined way, and you're shaved and given habits and all of that. And then I was sent to New Mexico. Being an activist, I knew what was going back on in Louisiana, and I wanted my superiors to, when I was finished my training, to go back to Louisiana to get involved in the movement. And they knew who I was, so they said, "You're staying in Santa Fe." So, being a young brother, all brothers take vows of poverty, chastity, obedience. Those are the 3 principles that all religious orders take, but orders take additional vows. And in my order, we took another vow called to teach the poor gratuitously. My order was founded in 1681 for poor children, for kids that didn't have an education, who couldn't, whose families had no money. They were not children of the merchants, or the royalty. They were the people on the street. They only spoke in the vernacular, and school was only in Latin in those days, in the 17th century. So he founded it for that, but now, several centuries later, like most institutions, some things become vestigial or atrophied. And the rationale from the brothers and in the day, God bless them, was that, well, if we live like the people we serve, how are we going to take care of ourselves? So I didn't notice the Nazarene having any trouble with that comment. He says, leave father, mother, sister, brother. He says, if the birds and the bees and the fishies aren't worried, why should you? And I believed him. So I've been living that way now for 80 years. And it's the best way to go. You're not involved with all this security madness, etc. So as a brother, that was my intention, to live those vows. And as a result of it, I got thrown out of the brothers. I had a following because of my big mouth. And other brothers who wanted to live their vow of teaching the poor gratuitously. And that led to a lot of conflict. And I was asked either to go to Rome and work in the archive, which means be buried alive, or go to the College of St. Michael's College of the day and teach philosophy or theology, which would, to me, not possible to do. And so they said, but really, you should leave, and bye-bye. So I left, and bye-bye it was.
Yes. Well, as far as the teaching, the working with youth, I excuse me, I was inspired myself by the Qatsi Trilogy originally to teach media literacy with youth in Albuquerque. And it's something that I've noticed in the US. Media literacy is not something that we focus on in the curriculum, whereas many other countries in the world do. And I'm wondering what thoughts you might have on why it's not a focus in this country.
I don't know. I never really thought about it. So your question, I don't really have an answer for. I guess I'm not for schooling or media literacy with the lunacy on the media today. I would say the best literacy is to get rid of the media, get rid of the gizmo. I would be happy to put all of the I done in that basket and throw it right into the fire, because it's homogenizing us. It's making us, it's alluring, it's addictive. We're bought and sold. We are the product. We're not the literacy. We are the product that they sell. And please, I'm not exaggerating. Those that even create these don't let their children participate in them, because they know what a terror it's going to mean to them. It's like being addicted to a substance that's considered legal and wonderful, and if you don't have it, you can't even get out of school. So little kids. I was with a buddy the other day, Liam. We were at some big public hall, and to make a long story short, we were sitting in a group of maybe 50, 60 people in a little hall in an open space. Every person, Liam pointed out to me, was on a gizmo but me. So I felt like an idiot. Everybody was on their gizmo, their fingers running. Anything we do with our fingers patterns our brain, by the way. It's all connected, our feet. Be better your sermon to walk with one's feet. The feet touch the ground. That's the truth. Walking should be our sermon, not media literacy. So please, I'm taking a contrarian point of view, but I believe in being emphatic and you know, to see the enormous power of no. The power of no is the power that leads you to yes. The ability to be hopeless, the courage to be hopeless, is that which gives you the courage to be hopeful. And hope is not in the mind. It doesn't dance there, though that's where most people dance with hope. It never gets out of there, drives you nuts. It means nothing. It's like a goodwill card or something. Hope is in the act we do. Greta Thunberg, we have to thank her to remind us of that, not
Yes.
Aristotle or St. Thomas.
And I have to say that that is a quote that I had read of yours that I was particularly pleased with, was about how negativity is looked down upon these days, and that you have to have a certain negativity to find the hope. And
Well,
it's how
as a filmmaker, if I may interrupt, as a filmmaker, what you do when you shoot a film is you shoot a negative. You can't have a positive unless you shoot the negative. I mean, I
Yes.
know it's a metaphor, but there's a value to negativity. If you see it as doom and gloom, then you miss it. The 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 twins of drama are the comedic and the tragic. They exist in the same body. Tragedy is the way to deal with, the comedic is the way to deal with tragedy. Baudelaire says that the smile is the stigmata of original sin. It's all, we're a complex being, yet simple as can be.
Indeed. Well, and that's what I've always seen in your films is they make me feel somewhat hopeless, but then I feel hopeful at the end. I go
Look at
through
him.
that full cycle each time. And I had a friend once who we went to go see Baraka, and we were discussing some of the similarities. And of course, it's Ron Fricke's work,
Yes,
and he uses some very similar shots and builds upon some of the work he did on your films and does some new camera tricks and things. But
indeed.
afterwards, this friend said, "Well, I tend to prefer this because it feels more positive." And he said, "Of course, you'd like uh, Koyaanisqatsi more because it just feels so dark." And to him, it felt dark and negative. But to me, that's where I found the hope. And it
Well,
was hard for him to see that.
these aren't, they're not mass man films. They're not for everybody. And
Yes.
in fact, most people haven't seen anything I've ever done. So they've seen Koyaanisqatsi, Anima Mundi, maybe Kids. It was popular for a moment. But, you know, you want people to see them, but these aren't, Marvel comic books. These are for those that can see them. And we live in a diversified world. So it's for those that can hear.
Yeah, this was the same guy who said at one point, I looked through the world through Koyaanisqatsi colored glasses, is what he told me. So he knew how much it had affected me. But I'm curious, in talking about the devices and youth using devices, what are some of your thoughts on what the result is going to be after the pandemic of how many youth have had to go on to e-learning and work only from home via a screen, and
Mm-hmm.
also the idea of what we've considered sane is really insane to others. And somehow that slowdown over the last year, I think, has given some more people, some I know anyway, a chance to look at the world a little differently and say, that really was kind of an insane existence. Can we not go back to that? And so I'm
Right.
just curious on your thoughts of how the pandemic
Well,
is going to affect some of these
you
things.
frame it very well because that question is being asked all over the place right now, and it's only being framed in terms of technology.
Mm.
Like, are kids going to go back to socializing more, or are they more now routinized in the medium? Well, there are discussions beyond that. Okay, I mean, as insane as the COVID might be, it's not that it appeared from China and we blame the Chinese. It's the technological world we live in that is taking nature and eating it up. Okay, where are these creatures going to go? They go inside of us, and what do we know? We come from viruses to begin with. Okay, we're a virus upon the planet, really, and that's the big event. So to go back to normality would be insane, but of course that's what people are dying to do, all of us. So we're a little insane. What the particular routinized behavior is, I don't know. I would say that certainly everybody who's had to be imprisoned at home for all this time has probably done an awful lot of nail biting and dealing with the internet to the point of maybe where they're becoming internet fatigued. That they're starting to see that, there's only so much of this shit you can eat. I mean, it starts to drive you crazy after a while. We are made, you know, you can't feel yourself by touching your hand like this. Someone else has to touch your hand for you to have the beauty of touch. That's why we live together. That's why we have children. That this is who we are. And we're becoming more disembodied by the nanosecond, literally. And so we become numbed at that point, if not touched. Numbed. You can be touched through creativity as well as the hand of another person. So that's another form. It's more esoteric if you want, but it's who we are. We're here to create. So there's all kinds of ways of touching the disembodied flesh of people. I look at cinema as putting flesh on the word so that you can see and feel. Cinema is to feel, not just to see.
Yes. And I think Koyaanisqatsi was the first time I realized that when I saw it in 93. I had felt something in other films, but it wasn't the same. It truly takes that to a different place. And I know what you're saying, and not for everyone. Everyone sees it a different way. But for me, it truly hit me at that right moment. It was early in college. I was open to new ideas, new things. I was breaking away from how I'd grown up and what I'd been taught. And it just happened to come right in and go, yes, this is exactly what I'm feeling. And it put life to that. And so it shifted everything to come after, and everything that I've viewed and how I've interpreted everything has come through that lens, because it just touched me at just the right moment and in the right way.
Beautiful. I had the same experience with another film, a film by Buñuel. It just caught me right at the right moment and changed my life.
Yes.
I don't go a few days without referring to it in some way, or him, or it's just how things are. Those are the things you remember because they remember you.
Yes.
Well, interestingly enough, I hadn't seen it until we went to see it in Boston. So about
2019, the live performance with Philip Glass.
Oh,
and for me, it registered in a completely different place. I was finishing my dissertation, and it really had me questioning all of these things that we were taught and how to look at them, whether it's on a microcosm or whether it's a bird's eye view. And then when I rewatched it again, I came away feeling different, with more questions. Things like the combustion at the beginning made me feel reminiscent of the images of 9/11 and the ash falling, and how we keep putting ourselves in this cycle of things that are destroyed or impacted greatly. We think we learn from these lessons, but we don't.
well,
And we
you
keep
bring up
repeating.
such a good point. Yes, keep going. It's these films. If I can use two words, there's orthodoxy and there's heterodoxy. These are heterodox because they get you exactly as you said. They don't give you answers. Their intention, for those that are open to it, is to raise a question. that only you can take. It's what happens to you after you leave the theater that's important. Jodorowsky, the most interesting filmmaker, what is it called? You know who Jodorowsky is. He's a very famous filmmaker. Okay, I can't remember the exact quote, but he makes it much clearer than I. He says, "I want to get these people in the theater. I want to murder them, kill them, so that when they leave, they're completely different people." This is, that's the passion that I feel as well. It's an opportunity, albeit through the contradiction of mediation. So we're using the very tool that we're questioning to deliver this, because when in Rome, speak like the Romans. When in California, fighting the fire, build a fire. It's that kind of strategic approach to the medium, so that we can enter this, as it were, into the vascular structure of the beast. And then if it's alive, it'll carry itself all over the place. And these are like children, and some of them are continuing to worm their way throughout the grid. They're all over the place. So they have a life of their own, which I feel very good about. They're kids. They have a life of their own. And because they're mediated, they could live as old as Methuselah.
Yes.
Or die a quick life. So we'll see.
Do you find that a number of young people come to you about them or discovering them because they're at that place when they're starting to question what they grew up with and are looking for new ways of seeing the world?
Yes, I do. I get a number of requests from younger filmmakers to look at their film for all the reasons that are, you can imagine, and why they're interested. And I do think that the films are being seen by younger people because, of course, they're younger people now, and everybody's plugged into the medium. You almost can't avoid it. And of course, this is easy to avoid when there are billions of inputs every day. But it's made its way through, and it's still probably somewhere every day. There's a screening of Koyaanisqatsi. And I get that all over the place. And it's been stolen, ripped off. It's been in Hong Kong markets been all over Russia, bootleg. That's all good. It's all good.
And that actually brings me to a question about the style and the look, particularly of the Qatsi Trilogy, is something that has been in its when each came out, people hadn't seen that before, not much of it, not in that way. And since then, a lot of that style and technique has been used and co-opted and put into other things, commercials, music videos. Some are meant as an homage, and others are just used to sell something because it's fast-paced and catches attention. And I'm curious as to whether you think that has impacted the message because it's become so ubiquitous, this type of image. Has it lessened the impact, or has, in a way, it increased it because people are more prone to see it because it's what they become accustomed to, and so they're going to listen in a different way?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and it's one that's been asked to me before. How would I answer that? The language that was developed for Koyaanisqatsi is an artful language, and it's a language based on re-seeing that which is normal. What it had going for it is the emphatic nature of how to see the normal, which is on speed and rush hour, outrunning the future. So, advertising companies are famous for picking up what they consider the brightest and the youngest and brightest women and men out of college who can do all kinds of gizmos for adverts. It's a huge, gigantic business. These young people, unlike the people that run the company, picked up on the language. They saw it not as an exclamation point, but a language. So it started to infiltrate as logos and newscast and and all kinds of things. Even Dear Francis started to use it in his movies. So it became something that was picked up by the beast. But the beast is so, I will use an example. You're too young to know this, but bell bottoms in the 60s were developed by hippies in order to wear their boots. They fixed their own pants into bell bottoms. So I go into India a few years later, everybody's got bell bottoms on. I come back to the States, everybody's got bell bottoms on. It has nothing to do with hippies. It has to do with, hey, look, the kids like this. Let's put it to them and we'll make a lot of money. And they did. Well, you can go on and on and on from Tang, which was developed to go to the moon. Now it's everywhere. And at Alia, all of the technology that goes into making the biggest war machine 10 planets have ever seen is what creates the life we live today in Wonderland. That is the price we pay for the pursuit of our technological happiness, the destruction of everything around us. So, in that sense, these words have been picked up. I'm at the point now where the word, in terms of the visual, okay, substituting word with visual, is so omnipresent, not of my work, but of visualization through the gizmo. You can do 5K, 8K on a little gizmo that a 4-year-old has now, that the images, it's omnipresent and everywhere. It has no more impact. A child living for an hour on his gizmo will see, or she will see, more images in an hour than a person in the Middle Ages will have seen in their lifetime. Literally, literally, literally. They're coming at you like tomahawks. Okay, so what I'm saying is that the image is losing its impact now. The films I do, I wouldn't do again now because it's losing its ability to commune because it's so present. It's become part of the ordinary. Even you see it on National Geo. You can't see something now without footage that will drop you to your knees if you saw it 20 years ago. Now, you have another bite on the apple and move on. It doesn't matter. So we're in a point of saturation, and in saturation, it's a time of crisis, but it's a time to rethink things, rename things, redo things. It's a wonderful time to be alive.
Would you say that that's contributed to how the look of your films has shifted and changed over time?
Yes,
As
I do.
visitors and the new film that you're working on.
No,
Okay.
well, I don't want to talk about what I'm doing. It would be like telling you what a bowl of fruit tastes like. But I can tell you that we are creating our own genius loci right now rather than going out into the world. And we're taking it and we're recreating the story of the garden, the kindergarten of Eden.
Yes.
And we're retelling the story of the tree and Mother Muse and the apple, Adam's apple. And we're giving kids another slant, all in the manner of autodidactic, but in a vocabulary that kids can understand. So that'll be finished by the end of the year. And then we will carpet bomb the internet with it.
Nice. So,
They're like little neo fast foods for children.
well, as you were saying before, use the medium that everyone is looking at to teach them about it. Would you say that the basic questions that you're asking about the world are the same, but the language has changed and the means of asking those questions has
Indeed.
changed?
Indeed. It's like, you make butter. When I was a kid, we didn't have butter, we churned butter, okay? We made our ice cream too. We didn't have refrigerators, we had ice boxes and all that shit. Seems like 1,000 years ago. Well, it's longer than that technologically, okay? Like 1,500 years ago. So in the films, it's like turning around. You have to keep turning it. All my films are exactly about one thing: the technological environment, being sensate We become the environment we live in. The thing that no one sees, we see technology as affecting the environment, affecting politics, affecting war, affecting gender, affecting this. It's not that. It does affect, but it's that everything exists inside of technology. So in that sense, technology is an environment, as unbelievable as that is. We live in an enclosed bubble called the orb, and it's eating up the planet. And if you see it at night, it's like a sparkling, you know, something to explode almost. It's all full of light, and that's the world we live in right now.
Yes. You spoke about technology moving at a much more rapid pace in terms of seeming like it's 15,000 years in technology terms. That makes me think of Moore's law about technology increasing and advancing exponentially. But it brings me back to the privacy campaign and a particular part of that campaign. And I might ask for a little more detail for the audience on that campaign. But I know a large part of that was 10 years to go, because it was in 1974, and it was looking forward to 1984 and what the world might be like as technology, and particularly invasive technologies, increased exponentially. And I'm curious just to hear 47 years later from that initial point where you think we've gotten to, and you've definitely touched on that some already, but also, well, I'll stop there. Just kind of where you think we've gotten to with that.
In 1974, we wanted to do something that made a connection to something that's well known, and Orwell's 1984 was well known. While the world we're describing is not by any means exactly the Orwellian world, it's way beyond the Orwellian world. In fact, that's kindergarten compared to what we have now. I want to say that in 1974, with the research that my group and I did, everything that Snowden has talked about in the past few years, we uncovered through research as being in its nascent and already very dynamic form. There were all kinds of files on every person in the country. Social Security number was being given out at birth then, rather than at 18 when you entered the labor market. You were being numbered, followed, and technology was being used in an aggregate way through technocracy. So bureaucracies became technocracies run through average and computer systems, punch cards. All of that is only it's like seeing the world we live in through a veil then. But it was all there in brilliant form already. Now it's taken off. So as E.F. Schumacher said in the 60s, small is beautiful. Now we can say with complete clarity, small is dangerous. Everything is becoming smaller and smaller to get bigger and bigger. The smaller we get, the faster we go. So it's it's a conundrum, and we're outrunning the future. Basically, we're eating up everything in sight, and we're feeling pretty good about it. It's all about money and right or left politics, which has nothing to do with anything other than the isms that all of us have. Unexamined isms become prisons. So it's it's a crazy time, but again, a wonderful time to try to rename the world. Now, not being, don't be a megalomaniac. To rename the world doesn't mean you get a loudspeaker and we're going to rename the world now through my film, Koyaanisqatsi. That's ridiculous. My world, like your world, is your range of relationships. It's become a little more complicated because our relationships are in 3 dimensions now. We're in a 3-dimensional world, a world that as I said earlier, we're all connected as well. But in fact, in terms of the flesh that we are, like we don't have a body, we are a body. I never heard anyone called I body, but I have heard us call my body. Okay. we have a body, and that body demands, or it's going to disappear. It'll be vestigial. It'll be held together through chemistry and algorithms, and you'll be gone, long gone, and it'll be smiling as if you were there. So what I'm saying is that, forgot what I was saying, but I can't say it any better than that.
Yes. Well, it makes me think of Brave New World, Huxley's work,
Oh, that's much
especially.
closer. Yes, Huxley's work is much closer than Orwell's for me.
Yes. And especially being in New Mexico, which in the book is considered the land outside of technology, where people are still more closely connected to their emotions and feel pain and pleasure without the help of soma, which was the drug that they would take in the book in the nation state of the rest of the world.
Well, though, but let me put a big caveat to what you said. New Mexico is the Siberia of the United States. We have the biggest weapons lab on any number of planets.
Mm-hmm.
We have White Sands, where they did the first atomic blast on the planet, which the state is still suffering from. We have Sandia, where they take all of the power from Los Alamos and fashion it into prototype weaponry. We have in the Sandia Mountains the biggest repository of nuclear arsenals on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So they chose us because we're simple folks and would be happy just to have a job. That's what they thought. So, beauty is always the first place that they try to go to, because beauty usually has its own presence, and people are hard to find their place in beauty. And so they've taken it over. The biggest thing in the state is the national government.
I do remember that, is that there was the huge disparity between the people living a very rural life throughout the pueblos, and then you had the highest rates of poverty, but then the highest per capita PhDs because of all the people working in the labs.
Living in Albuquerque, and
Mm-hmm.
certainly in the state, there's no Blair on the planet that would match it.
Right.
Because of all the techniques that's required.
Yes. Yeah, it's unfortunate that it has that connection, because it is such a deeply beautiful place. Stepping into some more specifics about a few of the films,
Mm-hmm.
I have seen some really fascinating discarded footage from Koyaanisqatsi, and what's interesting about it is how similar it is to the privacy campaign. And I know that you were headed in a certain direction, and then at a point you said, this isn't working. This isn't what I want to do. And you put the brakes on and ended up not using any of that. And you started over. And I'm curious about how you knew this was not what you wanted to do, and how you told the funders what you were doing.
Well, that was about 30,000 feet of 35 millimeter film. Took about 6 months. We did about 10 big sets. We made a Roman temple. We had great people working on the group with us. Could do anything, really. They made a Roman temple with a big light plug as the statue, with 70 people, 60 people unplugging it. We made a nuclear repository cave that's still used by NBC today as the real thing, because they thought it was. We blew up, I don't know, like 500 TV sets and a 16-phase explosion. That's the only thing that got into Koyaanisqatsi.
Yes.
Those sets were not done for the privacy campaign. There are others. They were done for Koyaanisqatsi. And after doing them, because I liked them so much and they were done so well, I said, gee whiz, it's going to really mess up the film. It's going to produce a confusion. Okay, so as much as I loved it, I said, we can't use it. My angel remarkably said, okay, if you can't use it, you can't use it. He was a little perplexed. Well, why did you do it in the first place? I said, well, maybe I was smoking too much. I don't know, but it seemed right at the time. But I want to tell you now, in retrospect, some almost 50 years later, all of that footage is going to be used, or some of it, in what I'm doing right now. So
Really?
it remarkably is perfect for what I'm doing right now. I'm going back to childhood. Never
Yes.
left it really, but I'm making a film for children, and this stuff is all about children that I showed them. So it's sitting at Harvard. It's going to all come to us this coming week, hopefully, and we'll be able to use it in the project for now.
That's fantastic. It really shows the cyclical nature of things. So
It was unexpected that this would be interesting for this project. Same
yes.
thing with images from not so much Koyaanisqatsi, or Powaqatsi, though that too, but many of the films that I've done, nobody has even seen. So I have a plethora that I couldn't buy anywhere else because someone gave me gazillion dollars to do an art project that few have seen, like in the case of Visitors or Naqoyqatsi. These are films that, like Koyaanisqatsi is like a hyperactive child. It's out there doing its thing. Powaqatsi is stoned out of its mind and doing its thing. Naqoyqatsi is in a language of the whole world, and when it came out, people didn't know what to make of it, and no one saw it. But Steven Soderbergh liked it and put up the bucks for it. And I think that film now is speaking directly about what's happening at this very moment. And Visitors is on another planet. It's
Yes.
74 images in 87 minutes. It's to give you the opportunity to gaze, this reciprocal gaze. It speaks to you as you speak to it. And this film coming up is going to be way off the charts. I'm so excited.
So are we. I look very forward to it. When speaking of visitors and evidence, two films where we have a lot of, like you said, that reciprocal viewing, people looking at each other.
Right.
I'm curious, whenever you were, because I know I probably look like those children in evidence who are watching Dumbo when I'm watching your films. My mouth is open and my eyes are wide. And I'm wondering if you watch the audience at your films to see how they're looking.
Almost always, if I can. And I used to sit up front, but people became nervous at me sitting on the side up front and looking at them. So I sit in the back, and I can tell from the back. I don't have to see the face. If the film is not working, there's restlessness. There's people moving around or fidgeting. If the film's working, they're like dead in the seat. There's not a motion around. And I mean that. I sit always now in the back when I go to the few things I go to that are live, let's say, or to a cinema event or festival. And if the audience is transfixed, they stay still. If they're fidgety, they're trying to get out, but they're embarrassed to be the first one to stand up. I remember being in Moscow once where at 9 in the morning there were 5,000 people that showed up for my movie at a place that makes any theater that we have look small, like a kindergarten. So I was so impressed. Yeah, they're coming. They gave me ahead of time a big bouquet of flowers. There were 5,000 people in the audience. Okay,
Wow.
the movie starts, Koyaanisqatsi, and about, I'd say 5 minutes into it, two people got up. And I noticed a lot of heads turning when those people, I was sitting on the side in a balcony looking down, only at the people. After those two people got up in waves like water, about 3,500 people got up and left. They went to play bingo or whatever they play in the other part of the big complex because they don't go to work. They didn't have any material in the factory that day. So this is the way to keep the boys and girls at play. You can go drink or go to the movies, but 1,500 people stayed in and gave me a rousing applause. So I'm just saying those are I was in India once showing, what was it? Showing Powaqatsi, and people were standing up in the audience screaming at the screen and embracing it. And I said, well, gee whiz, this is special. He said, mister, this happens for every movie in India. This is the way we participate. You call it the Rocky Horror Picture Show. We call it the regular movies here. So it was lovely to see.
On that note, I am curious about one particular sequence, or I guess image, in Koyaanisqatsi, the jumbo jet.
Oh, yeah.
The very long telephoto shot of that plane coming toward us. Now,
Right.
I'll tell you, when I had never understood in reading about artworks where people would get upset or kind of lose their minds because something was too different and too outside the norm. If a photo had been photographed from a certain angle or developed a certain way, or a painting depicted something, I didn't fully get that until I watched that scene. And as the plane kept coming and it didn't cut away, I started getting a little jumpy and saying, "You can't do this. This is too long. Just isn't done." And so, but then I really love that shot for that reason, because it evoked this very strong reaction about what was, I guess, correct about filmmaking. Now, of course, Koyaanisqatsi and most of your films break all those rules,
Well, let me
quote
tell you,
unquote.
though, this is a
But
good example. This is a very
yeah,
good example. My job on all the films I've done is to find locations.
yeah,
So I had visited previous to that a plant in Seattle where the 747s were being made.
yes,
Now it looks normal, but when you first see a 747 and it's never been seen before, it looks like the Empire State Building on wheels. Okay, it's gigantic. So I went out on a scout to LA, and I went to LAX, and sure enough, there's some 747s sitting right there. And they come out of the thing, or they go in, they do all this stuff. And I knew if that was shot in long lenses for a long time, it would look great. So now I want to tell you the rest of the story. My job is to give the location. Ron Fricke, the genius Fricke, his job is to talk with me. We talk a little bit. He has to frame it. He has to put the motor speeds on. He has to follow the shot. That's how it works. So
yes.
that's how we created this. And he and I, when after he was finished shooting it, he was so excited. He was squeaking in his voice. He and I would look at the rushes every other day. We sent him off to the lab. When we're finished, get him back the next evening, look at him the next morning. We could tell whether this was an it shot, whether it worked, and we all jumped for joy. It was phenomenal because of the lens, the motor speeds, and the object, the genius loci.
Yes. Yes, it is truly, to me, just an iconic moment and shot from the film. But the editing, as you were speaking about, I know that Ron Fricke and Alton Walpole kind of worked together on that
Yes,
final
they did.
version.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, but at one point they weren't the editors. It was someone from Coppola's group that was editing it, and it just wasn't working apparently. And
Yeah,
so Fricke came back, and everything just kind of, I guess he just was on the right wavelength and tune with you, because in an interview I saw, he said you looked at what he was doing and said, "Yes, that's what we're going for." And I'm just
yeah.
curious about how that process came to be.
So I got a editor, a dear friend, actually, Dennis Jacob, who was Coppola's creative director. He's a genius kind of guy. But he would come in, and dear Dennis didn't have a clue about how to edit this. He wanted to kept looking, where's the beef on the hamburger? Okay, you just got lettuce and tomato. So every day he would begin with a diatribe, being very brilliant, of 5 or 6 or longer pages, all handwritten and mimeographed at the time, for me to say why I couldn't be a director. And so I had to ask Dennis after 6 months. He could say that all he wants. It didn't bother me if he was making something. So I invited Fricke back into the project, who was off building his own camera because he had sensitivity to it. But I wanted to make sure, when you're dealing with a cinematographer, they get too attached sometimes to their image because it's so beautiful. So he was able to understand that and work with the music. And because he shot it, did a beautiful job with Alton of editing and finishing the project. So I couldn't have been happier.
Now, that's an interesting point. I know that there's a lot of footage from the demo version that didn't make it to the final version.
Oh, well, we had to shoot an enormous amount of footage, and it was, shooting is a learning process. The amount of footage that, let me compare. Koyaanisqatsi was a maiden voyage. Even though Ron had a little experience in film, he's basically self-taught. He went to the University of Oklahoma, probably knew more than they did, but it's self-taught. I knew nothing about it, nor the rest of the crew. Alton was into still photography and doc a little bit. So none of us really knew what we were doing. So there's an enormous amount of footage of Koyaanisqatsi that's not usable. We're figuring it out, learning the language. When we went to do Powaqatsi, on the other hand, I worked with two guys who almost never missed a shot. They were like phenomenal, Graham Barry and Leo Zardumas. And these guys were pro, but they were outsider pros.
Mhm.
And so we ended up with Koyaanisqatsi with an enormous amount of extremely usable material that, of course, you couldn't use it, and we only made the film for 100 minutes.
Right.
It depends on what you're the same thing with Visitors and Naqoy. We have so much footage that we haven't used that is as good as what's in the film, but it's all about the editing, not about only the image and its beauty.
And I'm sure there have been some, not battles per se, but some pushes as to what's going to stay in and what's going to go,
Oh,
because it's all so
absolutely.
good.
Well, when you make a film, you don't, or I don't, let's say, I don't know anyone that really does, you don't make it by committee. We'll take a vote today, how many want it in, how many want it out. It's collaborative. You get a sense of things, but at the end of the day, I'm everything from the mother to the assassin, and I take the responsibility for that. Like, for
Yes.
example, when Philip Glass was brought into the project by yours truly, people ran out the door. They said, "You got to be nuts, Godfrey. You're too stoned or something. This guy's the master of the broken needle." You could have Mozart, Beethoven. You could have Gershwin was the guy being pushed on me now. He's a genius. But Koyaanisqatsi with Gershwin is a wholly different experience, let me tell you. It's not the same, and that's what was being shoved at me. So I'm just saying there are all kinds of depths in this that you have to swim in, and sometimes you have to please yourself, even if it's not someone else severely disagrees.
Yes.
And that film would have never been the same without a Philip Glass score. Never.
No, they're inseparable.
I
Yeah.
find it entrancing.
Yeah.
Which is actually interesting. I had never heard until I got the Criterion edition, the Allen Ginsberg track.
Oh, really? Really? Yeah.
And it's fascinating to hear the sort of narrated version that as the images are going by, we're hearing a poem about what we're seeing. And it isn't what I would have wanted for the final version, but it's fascinating to watch as a
It
document
is.
of something that
It
could have
is.
been.
He and Peter Orlovsky, his companion of the day, and they both became good friends. Alan was the godfather of the girl that I am the daddy of, and her father is Gregory Corso, who is my daughter has a daddy and a father, and so I took care of her. Gregory was the blood father.
Nice.
And so I got to meet Alan because of that, and blah, blah, blah. And as soon as I heard it, he made it up as he went, of course. That was spontaneous under the rubric of gone, gone, forever gone, like mine, amen, with a harmonium. Both of
Yes.
them had a harmonium. So it's a Buddhist text. When he and I met a couple of hours before that, who was there? Let's see. Corso was there. The famous filmmaker from Colorado. What is his name? Super guy. And Burroughs was there.
Mm.
We all kind of shuffled around, and then Alan came in the room. He wanted to know what it was about. And after I spoke to him about technology, he says, well, it's clear to me, Godfrey, we worship different gods. I said, well, that's okay, Alan. And it's clear to me we do. And I think we'll both stay in the God we worship right now. He says, you're right. I'm not going to. But so he was gracious. He went to North Star Studios and did a recording. And I loved the recording. But I knew after hearing it, it was esoteric. It would only be for a handful of people, the beats.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad it still exists because, like I said, it's fascinating to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know we're almost at an hour and a half here, and though I have so many more questions, I don't want to steal your whole day from you, so I'll truncate it. But if at some point, maybe after this particular project is finished, you'd be willing, I'd love to talk again sometime.
Indeed, it would be a pleasure, Parry.
Well, if I may just ask kind of a final thing.
Yes.
I know that we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of Koyaanisqatsi, and I'm just wondering if there are any special plans for that year.
Hopefully to stay alive. That would be the first plan. And the second one, I didn't know it was for. I don't have any plans at all. None at all. Maybe the baby
we'll have
does.
To make some.
The baby's 40 years old now, so she's on her own. I don't know what she's going to do, but she's out there. She doesn't need me.
I have a feeling many people out there will put something together. So as long as we can all go outside and interact again.
There you go. Well, look, guys, big metaphysical hugs for you guys.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Well.
A pleasure to meet you guys.
You as well. Thank you so much.
So thank you. Beautiful faces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we hope you have enjoyed this interview with Godfrey Reggio. We are just incredibly grateful that we had the opportunity to do this.
Extremely.
And we really enjoyed doing it, despite our panic my panic anyway, in getting ready for it and sort of fanboying out and just being beside myself and being able to do this.
Yeah, and it just really goes to show his unequivocal want, even still, to go ahead and convey the messaging regarding technology and regarding media and how the two are really inextricably linked within our daily life, and utilizing the media as a medium in order to go ahead and get that message across. It made me think about how much screen time I'm personally doing, not only for my job but in my personal life, and maybe taking a page out of that book and making sure that I do deconnect and step away even on a daily basis. So I learned even more about what I do with tech in my own day to day. Yes.
And, even our conversation about media and media literacy was eye-opening for me as well, and sort of is helping to shape some of my views about how I approach that in the future too.
Yeah. So we hope you've enjoyed not only the interview, but also our episode. And if you've caught one and not the other, I would say catch the other one as well too, because there's so much and that we could talk about. And I think with every viewing of Koyaanisqatsi, you're going to gain new insight and a different perspective.
And by the way, this was also a video, and he was okay with us showing the video. So on our website, which is youhaven'tseenwhatmovie.com, will be the video version of this interview as well.
So remember,
be kind.
Rewind. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.